Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to today's oral webinar entitled How to Win Friends and Influence People, Engaging Publishing Stakeholders with Audience Insight. In this session, we will hear from the Head of Insight at Penguin Random House, Laura Bijelic. Laura actually spoke at our oral conference this year. In this webinar, you'll hear from Laura as she talks us through her presentation. The slides are available on the oral website in the resources section should you need them. You'll have your chance to put your questions to Laura at the end of the session. So please use the Q&A function which you can find at the bottom of your screen for your questions, and then I will put those to Laura when she's finished her presentation. So without further ado, I will hand over to Laura.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the intro. As Louise mentioned, my name's Laura and I work in Audience Insights at Penguin Random House. I've worked in Insight for about 14 years now, kind of mixture of agency and client side, and I've been at Penguin Random House for about 6 or 7 years. So I'm going to be talking about my experience specifically in publishing, and a kind of fairly new industry to Insight, and a little bit skeptical, must be said, kind of some tricky stakeholders. So kind of what I've done specifically in this role to win over stakeholders and get Insight embedded into the business. Okay, so yeah, book publishing, like I say, in an industry, it has been traditionally quite based on instinct rather than insight. So the editorial staff kind of see themselves as tastemakers, as kind of spotting the best books before anybody else. There wasn't really seen to be a role for readers or kind of audiences per se. It was very much kind of them leading the conversation. But it is in a state of change. So a bit of background, there wasn't really any insight function, any UK publisher until about 8 or 9 years ago. Obviously, like I say, this was because of that reliance on intuition. But the things that have changed are that before, our customers were really bookshops, so retailers, we only really kind of had to persuade them, I guess, that we'd made the right decision. Now we can actually speak to our readers directly. There are people that we are kind of talking to all the time on our website, on our social media. Another thing is that there was a bit of a dawning realization that people inside publishing weren't really the same as people outside of publishing. So actually, we have to know what a different, diverse readership is like. We can't always kind of instinctively be publishing for all of these different people when we're a very kind of small subset of society ourselves. And actually, is our instinct always right if it contains unconscious bias? Also, publishing is a gambling game. It's a bit like the movie industry, where there's a lot of things that don't make money and a lot of really big kind of hitters that take the whole industry along, really. But it's a numbers game. If we could kind of improve our odds even slightly with audience insight and kind of trying to decide what might be a success beforehand, then that will translate to financial success in the bottom line. It wasn't easy to sell in research, but we have been able to show it's possible to achieve a balance between this kind of editorial instinct and research and to engage stakeholders. So I'll show you how we've done it. So this is slide 3. We've used something called, I've called it the 5 C's, but essentially kind of a couple of different ways we've done it. So I'll be talking to you about communication, conversation, creativity, competition, and change. I'll go through each of these in turn, explaining how we were able to engage stakeholders, how we were getting our insights noticed and expanding our reach around the business, and how we were able to get audience thinking embedded in the day-to-day. So the first one is communication. That's slide 5. So this is really talking about internal communication, so kind of just improving our internal comms and how we're sharing research. Slide 6 shows one of the first ways we did this was through our dedicated website and regular newsletter. Again, let me backpedal slightly. As a bit of background, Penguin Random House is made up of 8 different publishing houses, plus an audio division. So we do a lot of projects, hundreds of projects. There is actually only 6 of us in the team, but we do a lot of projects. So we were kind of quite hidden though, even though we were doing quite a lot because our business is just quite siloed. It was really hard to let everyone know what was going on, and also to share learnings from relevant projects across everyone who might be interested. So we created a kind of a website, a specific website just for us and our insights that is hosted on the internet essentially. It has this extensive information about our audience segments that I'll talk a bit more about that later. Who they are, what they do, their shopping and media habits, their tastes and preferences, just kind of everything really that people would need to know. It's quite a kind of self-service portal in that regard, with information about segments. But we also expanded it so it wasn't just the kind of segment portal, it was very much the home of everything we do. So we put all of our insight reports on there across every project that we do that's shareable. Obviously there's quite a few that are confidential, but there's kind of sections on retailers, there's sections on platforms, so kind of audio, ebook, etc. There's genres on there, there's different audience types on there. And we also have a blog section where we regularly update that with kind of think pieces or things in the news, or kind of a deep dive into, you know, millennials or Gen Z or whatever it might be, so other bits and bobs. So now it is really a one-stop shop for kind of everything insight. In addition, we have a monthly newsletter that goes out to the business, and this features kind of in-depth articles and spotlights again on different audiences, updates on recent pieces of research or any big research pieces that have been in the news. So sometimes if there's something about kids' media habits or whatever it might be, we might do a piece on that and our view on that. The other thing that we did was kind of slightly change our team structure. Like I say, we're quite a small team, so there isn't really enough of us to have a dedicated person for each of the 9 areas of the business. But we have now a dedicated contact at least. So some people might work across 2 publishing houses or 3 areas of the business, but each person has a specialism essentially. And then that person regularly goes to sit with the publishing house. So we're across 3 different offices at the moment. So it does mean we're kind of not always at our desks. We spend, you know, 1 day a week out sitting embedded with the teams. We also have something that we call audience insight reps, where we've kind of hand-picked people from each publishing house. So we have a team of 9 fans, I suppose. So we hold monthly forums with them where we share insights. We hear case studies, they from us and us from them. We do creative brainstorms, but their role is really to kind of be a champion for audience insight, and we've kind of trained them and upskilled them in insight as well. And some have even had it written into their job titles now. Often they're a marketing or publicity role, but they've kind of taken on this additional role. And they have to take back what they've learned and cascade that through the business. So they take it back to their team meetings or to relevant stakeholders in the business. They obviously know their area much better than we do. And they'll kind of be a cheerleader for us. And often if we get lots and lots of requests, they're a kind of port of call as well, helping to funnel things that are less high priority and then things like that. So we work really closely with those reps. We've also had success embedding ourselves into the day-to-day by attending more regular meetings, especially editorial meetings. Obviously, it does mean a busier diary, but I think that regular FaceTime with editors does mean we're on hand if they have any questions about an author or their audience. Okay, the next slide is slide 8. So apologies for some terrible photos on this slide, but I will talk about what I've included them. So we've had some recent success in actually involving stakeholders in the research process. So traditionally we would kind of obviously have a kick-off meeting with them, go off and do the research and come back and debrief it, which is fine and still works in the majority of cases. But for kind of particularly tricky stakeholders or something that we need to make sure does land really well. We've had really good success in kind of taking them along with us. So it shows that we basically respect their expertise and we want them to be part of the project team. So it helps give them a sense of ownership over the project. It means they talk to other people about it and they're really invested in the outcome. So a recent example is we've recently launched a children's segmentation. And so what my colleague Diarmaid did, who kind of oversaw this, was he kind of had a steering group from the kids publishing division, and he held workshops along the way with not only them but also kind of wider teams. So instead of doing a big reveal of the segments and kind of, you know, a launch to the business, which is what we've done with our adult ones, and actually that worked perfectly well, but the kids team just had really special requirements and they were just, again, a bit kind of less sure about the idea of segmentation. So he brought people along the way. These pictures show him presenting at a drinks meeting, and he is actually presenting the unfinished segmentation, just showing people where he's got to, initial ideas, by no means kind of the final idea, subject to change, but this is kind of their thinking so far. By doing it this way, people felt really bought in, and it started drumming up excitement for when they were actually going to come, which was kind of a few months later. Then he had workshops to help name the segments and visualise the segments. And again, the steering group was obviously involved in that, and anyone else could volunteer if they were interested. So communicating with stakeholders openly and making them feel involved, it just slowly helps to get them to realise there is a place for insight alongside instinct, and that it won't replace it, it will just complement it. So the next one is conversation. So obviously that was, the last section was a bit more about us communicating with our stakeholders. This section is about getting stakeholders to actually communicate with readers. So slide 10. This is talking about consumer closeness. So for the last kind of 2-3 years, we've had a dedicated consumer closeness program at PRH called Consumer Connect. It has a couple of different strands. So we have Consumer Connect for Leaders, which is in conjunction with our kind of HR and learning and development teams. And it's actually a course. It takes senior leaders from across the business outside of London for 2 days. So kind of, I think we've had one in Leeds, one in Manchester, one somewhere else. And they meet consumers, have a kind of speed dating event on day 1 and a shop along on day 2, and then kind of talk about strategy and what kind of comes out of it and what it means for their areas of the business. We also have Publishing House Consumer Connect, where a number of our publishing houses have kind of taken the model essentially of kind of having a one-off day, whether it's an away day or kind of as part of a meeting, a kind of consumer immersion session, essentially a one-off focus group. And again, it might be speed dating, it might be kind of going out somewhere with them, it might be meeting them in another kind of setting. We design each one depending on the requirements of the project, but it is very much adapted to a specific audience or a specific issue that they themselves are facing. For example, kind of the audio team are very much wanting to speak to audiobook listeners, and we've recruited people specially to be in that segment. And then we also have Consumer Connect book clubs, which are our flagship project. We do one a quarter, where 12 staff and 12 consumers that fit our particular segments, they meet to discuss books on a particular theme. So each time it's a different genre and a different audience segment. The book club format was really good for getting editorial buy-in because readers and stakeholders, they can really bond. The thing they have in common is that they love books and talking about them. So they can get united. It kind of breaks down barriers really quickly if everybody's read the same book. We get them to read and discuss it, but the book club itself is probably only about a quarter of the session, and the rest of it is around gaining insight into their lives, their media habits, you know, how they're shopping for books, cues that they're looking for on the cover, you know, hooks and barriers, that kind of thing. And we do get lots of insight along the way, and we end up kind of writing these up into a kind of top 10 findings from each session and putting them onto our site for people that couldn't go along. But we've reached about 200 staff or so in the last couple of years from doing this, and beforehand, we didn't do very much qual, so it was really only a handful of people that had ever actually met people. So I think just getting a larger number of staff from out behind their desks out into the real world meeting readers, it's just been a really successful programme for kind of opening people's eyes and, like I say, kind of getting them to think of it differently. And the Detective Days picture is our kind of kids iteration of this. So for the children's team specifically, obviously it's a little bit harder to get eating sessions with kids or whatever on a regular basis. So this is much more a kind of ethnographic consumer closeness where they went along to the Lego store or Hamleys or the Science Museum and kind of just observed the spaces and kind of any trends that they could see and how kids were behaving and kind of playing with certain brands or spaces. And so we've kind of, for each strand, I suppose, we've kind of designed it slightly differently, but each one has the objective of just getting staff closer to readers and just opening their eyes to kind of how different consumers are to them. Another breakthrough was the launch of our dedicated reader panel. So we've probably had the panel for a number of years now, but it was kind of almost actually the first thing we did that got us loads of traction within the business. We were the first publisher to have a consumer panel. Now we've got about 5,000 readers around the UK who answer surveys for us every week. It's a really, really engaged panel and we get really good feedback on it. The immediacy of the panel was just a bit of a game changer, and obviously the cost savings as well. It just really broke down barriers to research, so being able to just get kind of fast, cheap research rather than having to undergo a massive research project every time was just a real eye-opener for a lot of people. We've used it in a lot of other ways. We do a lot of surveys, kind of testing covers and copy and, you know, hooks and author brands and et cetera, but we've done a few other things as well. We often send out proof copies to readers, so we might send kind of a subset of, say, 50 readers an advanced copy of a book and get them to feedback on it before publication. We've got panelists doing video diaries or media diaries. We've even got them to kind of feed in content to authors before they started writing a book on like certain ideas that they have. So it's not always necessarily just feeding back on kind of campaign creative or covers. We have done some quite interesting and different things which keeps them engaged. Okay, next, slide 12 is all about creativity. And this is really about engaging stakeholders and getting our research noticed through bringing readers to life in creative ways. So our segmentation has really taken hold in the business. It's been really successful. It's kind of used as a framework across the business as a way of kind of talking about and kind of categorising consumers. And we've had it probably for about 4 years now, but we recently relaunched it just to kind of refresh it and get everyone around the business to notice it afresh. For the relaunch, we commissioned new photography of all our segments just to make it a bit more up to date. We photographed readers in home and also in our in-house studio. We produced gifts, video interviews, and we even recorded podcasts with our audiences. We hung up posters in our meeting rooms and all our breakout spaces, and we even replaced all the mugs in the building with audiences' mugs, including a quote and the URL to our site. This meant, although we had the kind of big splash at the beginning with the big audio-visual elements and the kind of refreshed imagery, we were able to remind people of our readers and surround them with imagery every day. So with the mugs and the meeting rooms, obviously that kind of lives on and is always there as an everyday reminder. Another success we've had is producing quizzes. We have one that lets stakeholders know who to target their book to. They have a number of questions they have to answer about their book, and it gives them a segment. And also, there's another quiz that lets staff ascertain which segment they themselves belong to, which always kind of surprises people when we look at which are our most valuable or kind of biggest, most commercial segments and how few of those are actually in the business themselves. It does always elicit curiosity, and it's the most visited area of the site. Like I say, I think it it is sometimes just that interesting, highlighting how different we are sometimes from our target audiences. Another way of getting noticed through creativity is in kind of the research itself. So whilst these are by no means new methods for everybody else, for publishing, it sometimes does feel like quite a big jump for our business to kind of try new things. It's quite a new business to Insight. Like I said, we're quite conservative, have very low budgets compared to most other big businesses. But these obviously are the things that often get people most excited and get noticed. So recent successes have included a semiotics project of the crime and thriller genre for one of the UK's biggest crime writers. We've invested in visual attention software, which is a kind of eye tracking, it apes eye tracking essentially, so we can kind of just get some quick feedback on covers. And we've also invested more time in trends, so kind of we've taken out a subscription to a trends tool, and we've just started analysing trends a lot more through kind of desk research. We've got a yearly trends bulletin that we send out and do more regular updates on particular areas like food and drink, for example. Then the last one, I think it's the last one, is competition. So I'm on slide 16 now. As well as through word of mouth success stories and recommendations, we've recently started to formalise how we gather case studies and doing it far more frequently. So we send out impact forms for stakeholders to fill out after every project, and we gather quotes from them about what they did with the research and how it has had business impact. So now we have a kind of bank of probably 20 or so case studies from just the last year with kind of proven business impact and stakeholder quotes to that effect. We write this up into a one-pager, upload those onto our site, or we share them via our newsletter. It just means that stakeholders more frequently see that Insight has helped another team to get a book to #1 or to launch something really successfully, or turn around an author's fortunes or whatever it might be. They really want a piece of the action. And it is also just really useful for us as well to have these kind of case studies to hand when you get asked, which you inevitably do by someone senior, about, can you think of a time when we've done X, Y, Z, and we've got them to hand now, which is really useful. And we find often editors do have a sense of competition with those in other publishing houses. Penguin Random House, our divisions actually pitch against each other for the same book, so they are actually in competition with each other, which is quite a weird business model, but anyway. But it does mean that stakeholders are always looking for an edge. So having insight on a particular author audience can make a pitch stand out more, and we do a lot to kind of support pitches in the business. And we've also found there's a bit of a ripple effect. So often if you want to kind of break into a new area or someone's a little bit skeptical, if you just find one person who's kind of just a bit more interested and open-minded, and we often kind of get in by doing a pilot or a very small piece of insight with them, and then use that to win others over, because if it inevitably goes well, which hopefully it will, and they'll find it useful and interesting, they'll talk to other people about it. And when their peers see that other people are kind of doing these insight projects and finding success with it, then they kind of want a piece of the action. And you know, especially if it backs up what they themselves want to do, then they could very quickly come on board. And then this is the final one, so slide 18. So I'll just cover what we've actually seen in terms of business change, behaviour change in the business. So key to implementing change has been getting research embedded into our processes. One of the ways we've done this is to base all our creative and campaign briefs on an audience insight, which is quite a new change. It means all campaigns should now hopefully be based on an actual audience need rather than just an idea or kind of something that someone wants to do that ends up going a bit left field. We've also introduced a new framework for brainstorming ideas that puts consumers front and centre. Also, all our new digital launches are now either based on research or user tested in the case of apps and websites. One such success is our brand Page Turners, which targets one of our segments, heat seekers. It's based around kind of escapist reads. The actual brand itself was came out of co-creation with the heat seekers. And we've kind of tested content, we've tested campaigns, and we've won kind of partnerships based off the back of what brands the heat seekers like. And we've just kept our knowledge of the audience up to date with kind of regular deep dives, newsletter surveys, etc. We've also started to do post-campaign and post-event evaluations, so we do quite a lot of live events with our authors. This is now happening in a much more robust way. It was quite ad hoc before, so like I say, we survey everyone who attends the Penguin Live event and evaluate all of our campaigns to make sure they're informed by insight, and also kind of how successful they were and whether they stuck to the insight that was identified. And then I think penultimate slide is just this quote from the CEO. We've been actually able to change the language around consumers in the business as per this quote. We've got a whole new way of thinking about consumers, and we're constantly adding to our understanding through consumer closeness and the panel. We've been able to blend consumer-first thinking and publishing instinct to great effect with clear business results, and been able to win over even the most traditional stakeholders along the way.
That's great, Laura.
The final slide, the final slide is just the quote, really, just to say, this is one of the quotes from our mugs, just to let people know, basically, if they kind of help look at things in another light, sometimes it can really help. So hopefully you found that interesting, but yeah, thanks, over to you.
Lovely, that's great. Thank you, Laura, for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience. I see we've got one question in the Q&A. If anyone else has any questions, please do put them in the Q&A. Use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll kick off the Q&A. I had a question. You've been at Penguin since 2013. Can you remember what your first big win was?
Oh, that's a good question. It probably was, like I said, I joined to, one of the first things we did was launch the panel. So I think it was probably something to do with that. I can't remember probably the exact project it would have been, but I think when we first started to kind of get in regular kind of insight on book covers and were able to start sharing those, it just made people really sit up and get attention. So, you know, people were often wanting to win an argument against the author themselves or an agent, and us kind of saying, well, actually, you know, if we can ask us that, you can get 1,000 responses. You don't necessarily need to use it, but, you know, why wouldn't you if you can just have that backup to go in and kind of win your argument, was quite a big eye-opener. So I think it was probably something panel related. I think when people just really started to realise how impactful just having that research could be.
And it seems your consumer panel, you use it a lot. Do you have any tips on how to engage respondents?
Yeah, so I think it does help if the subject is something that they're really passionate about, and it's not a nat rep panel, it's very much a reader panel. So we recruit people based on if they're passionate about books, they'll want to be involved in the panel, essentially. And a lot of people do just want to give feedback on books, and one real big motivator for people is that they get to see things before they're released. So we're obviously testing covers and testing copy or concepts for books before they come out, and it's quite a big lead time. So often it might be something's not coming out till next year that we'll be talking about now. So I think just that kind of sense of ownership that people have, or they often talk about seeing behind the process. I think it's still a bit demystified, I think, because the publishing process is still something that people don't really know much about, and I think they get to kind of see a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes, which as kind of bookworms they're very, very into. Like I say, I think also that they're obviously being bookworms. The fact that we do sometimes send proof copies out, and we have it's a prize draw kind of incentive rather than points or whatever, but the more they do surveys wise, the more they can kind of get to different levels, and when they reach gold level they get a free book, stuff like that. So we do kind of still try and give them as many free books as we can. I mean, it's not a lot, probably one a year or something possibly, but otherwise we bankrupt ourselves. But we do try and kind of give additional incentives or let people read kind of sample chapters or things like that as well. So it's not the most kind of heavily incentivized panel. It is very much because people, it is a bit of a passion for people. So I think that's been something that's been really successful for us. And we do a satisfaction survey every kind of year or two and really listen to the feedback on that and kind of implement changes based on the back of it. So I think people feel like they're listened to as well.
That's great, thank you. I've got a few questions in on the Q&A. So one of them, the first one is, how do you measure impact? So do you have common themes so you can make comparisons across case studies, or is each one a separate case?
Each one's quite separate. So it's quite hard to kind of solely put bottom line performance on a piece of insight. So we couldn't say, you know, oh, Margaret Atwood's The Testaments is, you know, the biggest book ever sold, and that was because of us, and therefore we've made the company £1 million or whatever, because there's obviously quite a lot of other activity going on around The Testaments, for example. You know, there's like, it's quite hard to kind of take that away from publicity appearances or kind of the marketing campaign or, you know, whatever it might be. But I think what we often can do is compare where, so for example, if a book has done better than its predecessor, we're able to kind of say, look, we did a deep dive into this, we really examined it, we took a step back, we asked the audience, we made these changes, and as a result, this book's gone into #1, the last one only went in at #10, whatever. So we try and kind of compare the performance of an author with kind of how they've previously done. For example, rather than saying, oh, we brought in X amount of pounds to the business, which is kind of maybe slightly overreaching. And sometimes the impact might just be, you know, as well as financial impact or kind of sales performance or chart position or whatever it might be, it might be softer than that, and we don't have kind of set measures necessarily. Sometimes it might just be a quote from an editor saying, you know, this was really tricky, we're really kind of scratching our heads with this. This project helped us just, you know, have absolute clarity in where to go next. It really kind of galvanized the team, we all came together, we delivered X, Y, Z, and it might just be kind of around, like I say, ways of working, or them just feeling that they've kind of solved a really knotty problem. And so sometimes it is softer, but where possible, we do try and link it to at least some kind of sales performance, or kind of something changing for the better. It might be like the launch of a new brand, for example, or audiobook or something like that. So it might just be the creation of something rather than necessarily performance. But, you know, we do try where possible, but each one is done on a fairly ad hoc basis, really. So we kind of take each one as standalone rather than trying to have kind of KPIs or anything, or trying to compare across different ones, because some projects we do for massive, you know, Lee Child or huge authors, sometimes they're debuts, so it would be quite hard to kind of compare anything really. So it would be too hard to kind of compare them to each other. I think they're all fairly different.
Okay, I think I've got time for just one more. So if you had to pick just one of the approaches you've taken throughout all of these projects, which one would you pick as key?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think it probably would be one of the first two, so around kind of conversational communication, so internal communication essentially, and kind of external communication with audiences. So I do think there's nothing that can replace that face time where people actually get out and kind of meet audiences themselves, and that has the biggest impact of everything really. But I think just obviously that's not practical all of the time. So I think just at least letting the business know that this stuff's going on, and, you know, what we're learning as a result, and kind of sharing them these case studies, and kind of constantly communicating just kind of audience insights, like what we know about the audience, kind of just constantly just encouraging people to try and think audience first, and just, you know, think, well, actually maybe I should go and check the site, I'm working on this book and I'm not really sure. And even if they just go and do a bit of reading, and when they're not kind of doing a direct project with us, it's just about changing mindset. So I think the more we can embed it, as it kind of leads to behaviour change really. So I think just communicating and sharing success just kind of leads to more of the same. So I think probably, yeah, I would say something around conversations is probably the key thing, if I had to pick one.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Before we finish, I've just got a couple of notices about upcoming Aura events. So we've got our next seminar in London on the 26th of September and in Leeds on the 3rd of October. And that is the best of the AQR, where the AQR are going to share with us their best speakers from across the last 12 months. And it's a really great agenda, so I would encourage you to attend. And we've got a webinar on the 2nd of October entitled Better Decision Making, and that's with OCO. So please sign up for that as well. All information about upcoming webinars is available on the Aura website. And I think unless there's anything else that anyone wants to add, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us today, and thanks to our guest speaker, Laura from Penguin Random House. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.